Let me begin with a question. 2020. What stands out to you? And this is not a joke. Being serious. What happened? Nation, community, family. Anyone? What happened? Are you going to be serious? COVID. Yes.
You want me to give you a
Yes.
school shutdown?
School was shut down. Okay. What else? What happened in Hamilton County? What do you mean specifically? Yeah. And what did it do? It tore. Anybody want to know how many people died? 9 people died. 150 people were injured. 60,000 homes were without electricity. 60,000. All right, for a long period of time. It was not an easy time that we have been a part of. We live in a time where there's a lot of chaos. I mean, for most of you that go to school, even if you go to some kind of a co-op, you are going to be struck with one thing. At some point, your parents are going to get a call saying, we can't meet because somebody has COVID, and therefore we can't meet. That's chaotic. That stops everything in its tracks. And this is very much similar. The chaotic time of the day is very similar to the days of Isaiah. He was living in a time where moral failure was something which was very, very normal. People cheated, people had affairs, homosexuality was normal. We live in that day. In fact, God had already given Isaiah the message of judgment that he would hand out to the people of Judah. He was going to send a nation, he was going to send the Babylonians, and they would come and carry out Israel to exile. And of course, it came in the form of an army, destroying the city, carrying them out. Now, why did this happen? Does anybody know why? Why did God carry out this judgment against his own people? What happened? They defied God. They rejected him. His own people rejected him. Whatever commands they had, they wouldn't listen. They rejected him for who they would be. And so Isaiah was watching all of this happen around him. And the question that you might pose as you come to these chapters, or this chapter, is who are the people, who am I, as I read this, in the face of who God is? Now, I've titled this, God is King, because that is what you need to face. Each and every one of you might come from a Christian home, but each and every one of you has to face the fact that God is King. And that comes with something very, very awesome. We're going to read through this. Some of you might have read through this. You need to ask yourself the question, who is God? So I split this up into 3 sections. There's 13 verses, 3 sections. First one is the throne room of God. The second is the grace of God. The third section we're going to deal with is the mission of God. I'm going to read Isaiah chapter 6. I'm going to be reading from the New American Standard. Could you just follow on along? In the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar with tongs. He touched my mouth with it and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin is forgiven. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And then I said, Here I am, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, keep on listening, but do not perceive. Keep on looking, but do not understand. Render the hearts of this people insensitive, their ears dull, and their eyes dumb. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and return and be healed. Then I said, Lord, how long? And he answered, Until cities are devastated and without inhabitant houses, are without people, and the land is utterly desolate. Then the Lord has removed men far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst. Yet there will be a 10th portion in it, and I will again be subject to burning, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. The throne room of God. This is my first point. Now, you don't live in a country where there's a king. I mean, you might have watched shows where there are queens, but that might just be pictures, but you don't know what it's like to live with a king. I want you to try your best to take this as the vision Isaiah is looking at. He is standing, looking at a king. And this is not like a king you've seen. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, this is no Aragorn. This is no King David. He is standing before God. All right. Now, verse 1. In the year King Uzziah is dead. This is the context. Isaiah is a prophet to the people of Judah. Judah had a lot of good kings. Uzziah was one of the good kings. He became king at the age of 16. At the age of 16, he made a lot of changes to how the people of Judah worshiped God. Took away a lot of the high places where they would go to worship, where God told them not to worship, and he did a lot of good. But he came to a point where what he did went to his head. He became proud. He loved the power that he had. And if you go to 2 Kings, you read that God struck him with leprosy. Until the day he died, he had leprosy. He had to live outside of his palace. He couldn't go near people, otherwise they would be unclean. But he was a good king. His son, Jotham, was born and carried on that good way. But every other king in Israel was a bad king. They did what was evil in the sight of God. But with Israel, which was crazy, is that king after king kept on wanting to assassinate the next. It was as if there was always an empty chair waiting for somebody to fill that seat of the throne room, on the throne of as king. And this is, again, off the back, if you read verse 1. What had just happened? The king had died. But Isaiah looks, if you read with me in verse 1, what did he see? What did he see? Can somebody read that, please? Anyone? Yes, sir.
First verse.
Yes, sir.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple.
So God gave Isaiah a vision. A vision, a supernatural ability to see into something supernatural. He saw God sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, someone who is high above anyone else, his glory filling the temple. Now what is this telling us? Nobody had ever taken the throne away from God. Okay? In the grand scheme of kings that have come, even from the first king Saul, no one had ever taken the throne away from God. That was fact. God was on the throne. He was the king. God is the ruler. And he is still to this day on the throne. And it said his posture, he was lofty and exalted. He was the one above everyone else. And it says his train of his robe filled the temple. Now, a robe was a symbol of authority. Most kings of that day, if they defeated another king, what they would do is they would cut off the robe of a king and they would sew on that robe to their other robes. And it would signify that they had many victories. God's robe filled the temple. All right. There was nobody that could defeat God. No one ever. To this day. And I want you to understand that in the day that you live in, where day to day you just not quite sure what's going to happen next, I want you to understand this when you're facing a life of uncertainty. God is on the throne. When you call out to him for help and for peace and for love, he is there. And he's unlike the kings of Israel. He's unlike your parents. He's unlike your friends. He's great. He's glorious. He is the authority that you should look up to. The longer a king's robe, the more victories he had won. There's a great Baptist preacher, if you don't know him, and I encourage you to read as much as you can, Charles Spurgeon. He said this, and this might be a little bit out there, but just hang with me. This concept in Isaiah, he says, is sublime. Okay, he's very British. You think I'm English in my accent? I want you to think of even more limey. This is sublime. But it makes us feel, he says, how altogether inconceivable the personal glory of the Lord must be. If light itself is but his garment and veil, what must be the blazing splendor of his own being? All right? You are going to see the reaction Isaiah has when he sees God. He doesn't just sit there. He doesn't just sit there numbed by what he sees. Like when you're looking at a Netflix documentary, you're numbed out of your mind. Okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? No. You are brought to your knees when you come face to face with God. We are lost, Spurgeon says, in astonishment, and dare not pry into the mysteries, lest we be blinded by his glory. You need to be humble when you come in the presence of God. And what does it say? It goes on in verse 2. Seraphim stood above him. These were holy messengers of God. A lot of people have got a lot of explanations for who they were. I just want to say that these were angels singing God's praises. And the praises that they were singing were specifically in verse 3, where they say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. And when they said that, and when they sang those praises, what did it do? It shook everything. Everything shook. The foundations, verse 4, of the thresholds trembled at the voice of the seraphim who called out. And the temple filled with smoke. Now, what does it mean when they call out God as holy, holy, holy? It means to be separate, but I want you to understand this. Whatever definition I give of God, it's not exhaustive. I'm going to try my best. In the case of God, holy describes what he is in himself. He is not like you. Okay? He's not like me. He doesn't lie. He doesn't respond like you, like me. It refers to those, it describes what he is by his intrinsic nature as regards to us, where we change, where we fear. He is set apart as God. It signifies the entirety of his divine perfection. God is perfect in how he responds. You want to know who to go to when you're weak, failing, when you're in need of comfort, He is the perfection of that to you. And if you're a Christian sitting here today and you believe in Jesus, that's who you have access to. You have the perfect one at your disposal. You know this name, John Piper? This is what he says about this. From what can you separate God to make him holy? The very godness of God means that he is separate from all that is not God. There is an infinite qualitative difference between creator and creature. So the way you approach God, when you pray, when you read the Word, this is not like you're reading with your friend. This is not like you're praying and you're speaking to a sister or a brother. You are praying and you are worshiping God. And that's why when the seraphim say, holy, 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 and the thresholds shake, it's quite significant. This is what it is. Nature, in a sense, is a better interpreter of the majesty of God than we are. Now, why is this? Nature begins to react when God is in the picture. Okay? The whole world reacts when God is in the picture. Everything begins to shake. Everything trembles. Everything is filled with smoke. There is devastation. Frightening thing. Reminiscent of what? Of Mount Sinai. When if something touched the mount of God, they would be stoned. Fires come, smoke comes, and the people stay back in fear and horror because God is threatening. And I want you to understand that. If you're a Christian today, in Jesus, you're safe. But I want you to understand that. Just because you're safe, it doesn't mean God is any less threatening. If you approach God, understand that He is a consuming fire. He is a judge. Something I didn't say earlier. When it says that He's sitting on a throne, I don't want you to just think that He's got a crown on His head and a scepter. I want you to understand that God is not only king, but He is a judge. You see, back in those days, a king would stand as judge to his people, much like Solomon did. 2 women approached the throne. They're holding a baby, and they're both saying that the baby belongs to each of them. And so Solomon lays down his judgment of what to do. This was a throne of judgment. God is the judge. This is what you are faced with when you come into contact with the presence of God, in the throne room of God. But let's go to the second one, the grace of God. In chapter 5, you don't have to turn there, Isaiah denounces Israel for different sins that they have committed against God. If you go through it, every verse, there's something that they've done. In verses 8 of chapter 5, there were people that were extremely selfish. They did whatever they wanted at the expense of anyone else. Verses 8 and 9. Verses 11 and 17, he condemned people that were drunkards. He rebuked those who put God to the test. And I want to ask you, have you ever thought of this? Have any of you put God to the test with your attitude, with your playfulness towards a relationship with God? Because Isaiah rebuked those who put God to the test. They spoke about God as if He didn't know what they were doing. Isaiah reprimanded the morally twisted because what they did is they called good evil and evil good. And we live in a time like that. And then it goes on and on with Isaiah saying, woe to you, woe to you. But in Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah says, woe is me. And I kind of think of this, I say, is his conversion. God saves him. God doesn't just save him, but He sets him up for mission. But that's the next point. You see, the people around him, who had unclean lips that he was around. You see, they thought that they had gotten away with sin. Now, let me ask you this. Not just this past week, but this past year. Is there anything that you've gotten away with in your house that you know is wrong? And you're like, don't worry, Mom and Dad don't know. And what they don't know won't hurt them. Right? But I want you to understand something. If you think God doesn't know, you're mistaken. God absolutely does. He sees into your very heart of hearts. And so in his anger, God would call a nation like Babylon to take his people away in judgment. But Isaiah here, in verses 5, specifically says, woe is me. Isaiah stands face to face with the Lord and he sees himself as cursed. Now, at that point, God had pronounced judgment on Israel. Cursed are you. And now Isaiah said to him about himself, I am cursed. I have seen God face to face, and I am a cursed man. Because he is overwhelmed by his sin. He can see it everywhere. By looking in the face of God, he was able to clearly see his sin. And the way you can clearly see your sin, if you're sitting here today and you want to know, how sinful am I? Is to go to the very word of God. And you're going to say, and you might sit here and say, well, I'm not quite sure if I'm a sinful person. Read the word. Please be encouraged that there is something that you're missing. But I encourage you to read the word. Isaiah was overwhelmed. This is what it literally says. I am disintegrating within myself because of my dirty mouth. It is said that Isaiah is the son of the brother of a king. So he grew up with a great education. He went to the best schools. He had all of the social acclamations that he needed. But with that came social conventions. He would cuss in public. He would do what he wants. But right now, as he faced God face to face, he was confronted with an overwhelming sense that he was a sinful man. And that was specifically focused on his mouth. On his mouth. He was affirming his depravity. You've heard that word. He knew it. He was filled with despair because he had seen the King of Kings. And I want to ask you, have you come face to face with the King? And don't be scared. I'm not trying to guilt you here, but I'm asking you. Each and every person, both dead and alive, will come face to face with the King. It's a matter of time. Because in this chapter, verse 6, one of the seraphim flew to me with a burning coal in his hand, which he had taken from the altar, and he touched, verse 7, my mouth with it, and he said, behold, this has touched your lips, and your iniquity is taken away, and your sin, whoa, this is Old Testament, your sin is forgiven. Your sin is forgiven. Your sin is forgiven. This isn't cheap grace. This isn't something which I want you to picture. This is how sin was taken away in the Old Testament. This is a picture. This is a picture. This isn't cheap grace, folks. This isn't easy, believe, walk to the front row, let me help you, finish the sentence. No, there is pain involved here. I don't know if any of you have ever been scorched with coal. Any of you? I have. It hurts. And it doesn't go away that night. It stays with you for a month. Meat doesn't help take away the pain. Advil doesn't help. The pain makes your whole body sensitive. The lips, specifically here, sensitive, tender. In fact, in expressing affection to one another, We use the lips because of their tenderness. And is that very part of the body that the angel places the live coal? And I believe true salvation, if you think you're saved, true salvation is painful. It's painful. It's something you feel. There is a wrestling, there is a pain, but his iniquity was taken away and his sin was purged. And my question is your sin forgiven? John Bunyan, you've heard of him. He wrote Pilgrim's Progress. If you haven't, great book. Highly recommended if you're a young Christian. He tells the story that salvation didn't come in a blink of an eye. He said that before he had a sense of knowing Jesus, he agonized over his sin for 18 months. 18 months. It was painful. It's not easy. It takes a broken and a shattered heart. The pain of giving up sin. And that is what you're doing when you pronounce God as king. Because basically you're taking yourself off that throne. So what happens next? God commissions Isaiah to go on a mission. God is not a passive king, by the way. He's not somebody who sits behind a desk and looks at his followers and lets them lead the room. No. He sends his new ambassador, Isaiah, on a mission. And if you're a Christian and you're sitting here, I want you to understand something. You ought not to be passive about your belief in God as king. You need to be active. You need to take a leaf out of what Isaiah does. He goes with the message of this saving grace. So that's the third point, the mission of God. And God says, go to a people who will reject you. Go to a people who are dull of hearing, who don't want to see, who don't want to feel. He says, who will I send? Who will I send? And Isaiah says, send me. Send me. And I encourage you, you might come on Wednesdays, come on Sundays, be confronted with COVID and schoolwork and activities, but I want to encourage you, you have time on your hands. You have time to commit to the mission of God. To go and tell friends, to go and tell strangers, with the consent of your parents, who the king is. Who the king is. And I don't mean to the outermost parts of the world, right here. Right here. And I love that. I love this. He says, go, you're my man. Tell this people. Tell them. Tell them that God will forgive sin. There are a lot of broken people in the world. You might have brothers and sisters that are broken. You might be broken and shattered right now sitting here. But God will cleanse. It will hurt, but God will cleanse. God will judge. And he says to Isaiah, go and warn and go and offer gospel salvation. It doesn't say gospel, but it is good news. Because in God, the good, great King, is forgiveness of sin. And he says to Isaiah, you're my man. I don't need the perfect. Because I know you're not perfect, but go. This is the kind of person God sends. And you might think, I might not be as eloquent. I don't have the words. I don't have every significant point that I need to point my brother or sister or friend to, or aunts and uncles, or the gas station attendant, or the person at the grocery store, whatever. I encourage you to read the Word. I encourage you to remember when you were saved. What is it that you felt? What is it that you heard? God says go. This is sort of like the Great Commission of the Old Testament. God sending to go. To all, by the way. Let me conclude. The coal is a picture of atonement. This is a picture of the cross. This is a picture of Jesus being sacrificed for all who would believe in him. And in him is forgiveness. In him you are sent to go to all the nations. This is that significance. The same blazing, shining, majestic God before whom Isaiah trembled, he took on flesh. The God-man. Concealed his glory, humbled himself into the form of man. The exalted Lord of the heavens is if you're a Christian, is your high priest. The one you can come to. And ask for forgiveness. Ask for a way. Ask for comfort. Who has triumphed over evil. In Jesus you have perfection to be saved. You are not perfect, but he is the full deal when it comes to salvation. Every part of it. Every struggle you might have. Every confusing thought you might have about life, future, what you will do in the future, how you feel about this person or that. In Jesus, you have access to a great king. And I want you to understand this again. We don't quite understand what it is like to serve under a king, but this is the wisest, strongest. I mean, coming here, driving out of the garage, Zoe, our how old is she? 5-year-old. She said, "Daddy, you know who the strongest, wisest in the whole world is?" And I said, "Who?" And she says, "Well, God." And then she starts singing, "God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do." And you might be laughing at that song, but I want you to understand this. It's true. Because he did send a king. Because at the end of this, in verse 13, it says, the holy seed is its stump. God would not judge and take away his people. He would leave a remnant. From outside, from within that remnant would be born Jesus. We must be overwhelmed by the glory of our Christ and his utter holiness. Let me pray. And then you could go to your small groups.